The cameras rolled and the audience roared with applause as Jimmy Kimmel took the stage, his trademark grin plastered across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight's guest is a true Hollywood icon, a living legend. Please welcome Clint Eastwood." The cheers grew louder as Clint walked out from behind the curtain, but his entrance wasn't what people expected. There was no wave, no smile, no moment of light-hearted charm. Clint's expression was stone cold, his eyes fixed forward with the intensity of a man walking into a showdown. The contrast was jarring. Jimmy extended his hand, still smiling, expecting the usual warm exchange. Clint took it, but barely, his handshake brief and without enthusiasm. Then he sat down, adjusted his blazer slowly, and looked straight ahead without saying a word. Jimmy chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "It's great to have you here, Clint. You know, every time you show up, I feel like I need to check if there's a squint-off coming." The crowd laughed, but Clint didn't even smirk. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but sharp. "Let's skip the jokes and the fake laughs. Jimmy, I didn't come here to play along." The audience, sensing the tension, fell quiet almost instantly. Jimmy looked surprised, but he tried to recover, glancing around as if waiting for the punchline that never came. Clint continued, "I've watched this show a few times. Seems like all you do now is mock people who think differently than you." The mood shifted. The playful energy that usually defined the show was gone. Even the band went silent. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised, clearly caught off guard. "Well, a broken bar, all right," he said, trying to find a way back into familiar territory. But Clint wasn't finished. He added, "You invited me here, so let's have a real conversation and not a scripted circus." The audience didn't know how to respond. Some clapped awkwardly, unsure if they were witnessing a bold moment or a brewing disaster. What was supposed to be a friendly late-night appearance had turned into something else entirely, and it was just getting started. Jimmy, still trying to steer the conversation back into familiar waters, forced a laugh and said, all right, fair enough. So let me ask you, Thesa, are you still out there scaring liberals just for fun?" The crowd chuckled lightly, hoping Clint might break into a smile or offer one of his signature dry one-liners. But instead, he turned to Jimmy slowly, his eyes narrowing just a bit. The pause after the question was thick with tension. "Is that what you think I do?" Clint asked, voice low and deliberate. "Scare people?" Jimmy, sensing that his joke hadn't landed, quickly added, "I mean it in the playful way. You know, you've always had that tough guy edge, the rebel spirit. I just meant you still enjoy shaking things up, right?" Clint leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but cold. "You call it shaking things up. I call it speaking the truth, something I don't see much of in Hollywood anymore." The audience was dead silent now. Jimmy tried to redirect again, searching for safer ground. "Okay, then, tell USA, what truth are you talking about? What do you think people are missing?" Clint didn't hesitate. "They're missing the fact that comedy used to punch up, used to challenge the system. Now it's just part of the machine. You dress it in sarcasm and laugh tracks, but you're selling the same narrative as the rest of them." Jimmy blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge on his own turf. "Wow, I mean, this is a comedy show, Clint," he replied with a tight smile. "We try to have fun here." Clint fired back instantly. "Is it fun when you ridicule half the country night after night? Is it comedy when it's always at someone else's expense, someone who just happens to disagree with you?" The murmurs in the crowd were growing. Some were shifting in their seats, others clearly enjoying the unexpected drama. Jimmy tried one more jab, a smile barely clinging to his face. "Come on, you've been in the business longer than anyone. You know how this works." Clint shook his head slowly. "That's the problem, Jimmy. I do know how it works, and I'm not going to pretend I like what it's become." The weight of his words lingered in the room like a fog, and for a moment, it didn't feel like a late-night show. It felt like a courtroom, and Clint Eastwood had just started delivering his opening statement. Jimmy sat back in his chair, trying to regain control of the moment, the grin on his face thinning out into something more cautious. "Okay, Clint," he said, with an exaggerated calm, "since we're throwing punches now, let's go for it. You saw comedy's gone soft, that we're all just part of the system. But you've made movies with studios, use the same platforms you're now criticizing. What makes you different? Clint looked at him, almost amused. Difference is, I didn't pretend to be neutral while doing it. I've always said what I believed. I didn't build my career hiding behind irony and applause signs. That landed hard. Jimmy blinked slowly, letting out a dry chuckle as he shook his head. So, what do you think, I'm fake now? Is that it? Clint didn't flinch. I think you play a role you're comfortable with. You speak to one side of the audience and make the other the punchline. That's not comedy. That's propaganda dressed in a suit. A few gasps emerged from the audience. The tension was no longer subtly, it was alive in the air. Jimmy leaned in, voice a little sharper now. You really think I'm up here doing propaganda? Man, that's rich coming from Dirty Harry himself. Clint nodded slowly, then leaned toward Jimmy with that steely glare that had once made villains and westerns quiver. Dirty Harry was fiction. This is real. And in the real world, when the court jesters start deciding who's allowed to speak, we've got a problem. The crowd murmured, a mix of stunned admiration and discomfort spreading through the room. Jimmy, slightly flushed, adjusted his jacket and said, all right, you came loaded tonight, but this is still my show, and I get to ask the questions. Clint didn't miss a beat. Ask all you want, but don't expect me to play along just because you've got the camera angles and the applause sign. That line drew audible reactions. Some clapped, others stayed quiet. The live atmosphere had shifted entirely. This wasn't the usual back and forth of host and guest. It was a full-on philosophical standoff, and neither man was blinking. Jimmy sighed, forced a short laugh, then said, you know, this was supposed to be a light segment, maybe talk about your latest film, swapped some fun stories. Clint, staring ahead, replied, and maybe I was supposed to smile, tell you what you wanted to hear, and let the viewers go to bed thinking everything's just fine. But it's not. The room fell silent again. No music cues, no jokes, just the growing tension between a veteran icon unwilling to be silenced and a host trying to hold his ground on national television. Jimmy, now visibly uneasy, tried to salvage the moment with humor. Okay, Clint, you've made your point. But hey, we're still friends, right? You'll come back next time with some stories, maybe even smile once? He forced a chuckle, hoping to lighten the mood. Clint turned to him, unamused, his voice calm but cutting. I'm not here to perform for your audience, Jimmy. I came because I thought there was still space for honest talk. But this isn't a conversation. This is a monologue with guest interruptions. The audience didn't know how to react anymore. What began as entertainment had turned into confrontation, and everyone could feel it. Jimmy tried again, leaning forward with a grin that no longer reached his eyes. Clint, come on. This is a late-night show. We joke, we laugh, we disagree. It's not supposed to be this serious. Clint slowly removed the lapel mic from his jacket, letting the cord fall to the floor. That's the problem. You've got the stage, a voice, and all you use it for is surface-level sarcasm. There's nothing serious left when everything's a joke. But these are this country, this culture, it needs seriousness now more than ever. The silence was deafening. Even the band, usually ready to cue in with background tunes or comedic stingers, remained frozen. Jimmy's face tightened. You're walking off because I told a joke? That's what this is? Clint stood, calm and collected. I'm walking off because you're not listening. And neither is anyone else who's too comfortable to be challenged. He glanced briefly at the audience, then back to Jimmy. I've said what I came to say. I won't be part of the act. Jimmy stood halfway from his chair, unsure whether to stop him or let it happen. Clint, he started, but Clint cut him off with a quiet, don't. The camera followed Clint as he turned and strode past the curtain, leaving behind stunned silence and a visibly shaken host. The audience, caught in the shock of the moment, began to applaud, some out of respect, others out of confusion. Jimmy exhaled slowly, returning to his chair and looking straight into the camera. Well, that was Clint Eastwood, folks, he said, forcing a crooked smile. Apparently not a fan of the teleprompter. But even that quip felt hollow. The mood had shifted too far. There were no recovery jokes, no light-hearted follow-ups, just the echo of Clint's words, the empty guest chair, and a room full of people realizing they'd just witnessed something far beyond scripted television. As the show went to an awkward commercial break, The silence in the studio lingered like smoke. Backstage, Clint walked straight past producers and stagehands, refusing interviews or comment, his face unreadable. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation had already hit social media. One user posted a 10-second snippet of Clint saying, "I won't be part of the act," and within an hour, it had over 2 million views. Twitter exploded. Hashtags like #Eastwood walks, #Kimmel vs Clint, and #Late Night Meltdown began trending worldwide. People weren't just watching the clip, they were dissecting it, frame by frame, meme by meme. Some users hailed Clint as a hero, calling it the moment late-night TV was finally challenged. "He said what we've all been thinking," wrote one tweet, attached to a gif of Clint's stoic expression. Others were less forgiving. "Clint Eastwood is a relic who walked onto someone else's show just to throw a tantrum," one viral comment read. Debate shows on cable news played the clip on loop, discussing whether this was bravery or a publicity stunt. Even morning news anchors weighed in, awkwardly joking about late night getting a dose of real drama. Jimmy Kimmel himself returned to the screen after the break, visibly trying to recover. He laughed nervously, looked around the room, and said, "Well, a broken bar that escalated quickly." The audience gave a mix of chuckles and murmurs, but the energy was off. In case you missed it, Jimmy added, Clint Eastwood just delivered a monologue tougher than any of his movie scripts and walked off before the credits. He tried to make it into a joke, but it felt more like a footnote to something far bigger than a late-night skit. Clips from that night flooded TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Reaction videos popped up by the hour, some praising Clint's refusal to bow to scripted entertainment, others slamming him for being combative and disrespectful. The controversy was too big to ignore. Media outlets put up headlines like "Clint Eastwood walks off Kimmel, a sign of cultural shift," and "Late Night gets real, Eastwood vs. Kimmel goes viral." Everyone had an opinion. Some framed Clint as a truth teller in a world of manufactured laughter. Others painted him as out of touch, a grumpy old man who didn't understand the format. By the next morning, even celebrities chimed in. A-listers posted cryptic tweets. Some defended Jimmy, others subtly sided with Clint. The debate wasn't just about the show anymore, it became about free speech, entertainment, culture, and the deepening divide between two very different Americas. Kimmel's show released a short statement saying they respected all guests and valued open conversation, but they would review how things unfolded. Clint's publicist, on the other hand, simply said, "Mr. Eastwood spoke his truth. That's all there is." And just like that, what started as a scheduled guest appearance had turned into a cultural lightning bolt. The clash was no longer just between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel, it was between two sides of the national conversation, and everyone, whether they laughed, cringed, or cheered, had now become part of the story.